What up? This is Tech from the Disruptive Faith Podcast. I just wanted to take a second and introduce you guys to one of my new favorite people in the whole wide world, Justin Giboney of the AND Campaign. And if you guys don't know, the AND Campaign is out there doing the work, like for real. Their mission is really to educate and to organize Christians in civic and cultural engagement. And listen, they're out here doing it. And with everything that's going on in the world, again, one of the things that we're trying to do during this time is have impactful conversations that can produce change. And there are just so many questions that I have. And so I wanted to sit with someone much wiser than me. So it was a pleasure to sit and chop it up with Justin. And I think you guys enjoyed this conversation. It was very inspiring for me and very eye-opening. So without any further ado, here we go. Let's have this conversation with Justin. Peace. All right. The Disruptive Faith Podcast, where we're having honest and necessary conversations that you may not be having at your local Sunday morning service. Highlight of my week by far, even though it just started, but I've been really looking forward to having conversations with this gentleman, Justin Giboney from the AND Campaign. And I first found out about you guys, I think I saw somebody with a t-shirt. And I was like, what is this t-shirt? And so they had posted a link and I went and I saw the link. And for me, it was so refreshing. And we can kind of get into it because I feel like Christians get really bogged down with their political party. They identify sometimes with their political party more than their faith. And so to see an organization that was making that distinction to me was huge. But before we go down that rabbit hole, Justin, why don't you tell people about yourself and about the organization?
Sure. Number one, man, let me just thank you for having me on. I'm excited about this conversation, man, and just giving us a platform to express the gospel as applied to civics. So I appreciate it, bro. Mm-hmm. So I live in Atlanta. I'm married. I got 3 kids, 3 sons. I'm an attorney by trade. I'm also a political strategist. So I've been running campaigns and doing political consulting in Atlanta, for over a decade. So been in this game for a good moment. And just, really, I'm also an ordained minister.
Oh, wow.
Just really, really have a passion for the intersection between faith and politics and helping Christians understand how we can be good stewards and be disciples in that space.
Crazy. When was the AND Campaign started and why?
So it's somewhat of a long story, but I guess it started in 2016. And really the reason was that we saw a false dichotomy. We saw a lot of Christians struggling with politics. Some didn't want to get involved because they didn't know how to be faithful in it. Some were involved and weren't being faithful in it for some of the reasons that you mentioned. But what we saw, the reason why we thought that was because there was this false dichotomy between social justice and moral order, right? So the way that our political landscape puts it, if you're for social justice, then you're a Democrat. If you're for moral order and some of these morality questions, well, then you're a Republican. And we look at that, and that's a struggle for a lot of people and it should be, because the Bible doesn't situate it that same way. The Bible doesn't separate those two things. And so we saw that as a false question. We think that if you look at the gospel, you see justice and righteousness. You see love and truth. You see compassion and conviction. So for a Christian to separate those to fit into a political party, we thought was a mistake. And so what the AND Campaign was trying to do was create a biblical framework to apply to politics. So you wouldn't have to kind of abide by those partisan or ideological frameworks that I think pull us into unfaithfulness. Now, we weren't presenting a new party, but what we were saying was that as Christians, we need to frame the issues for ourselves. So even if you're in the Democratic Party like I am, you can say, well, the party don't run me, right?
Right.
They don't tell me what to do or how to look at the issues. It's a tool that I'm using really to glorify God, and my civic witness should be about God's will and not any ideology or party.
How do you think and I mean, maybe this is a broad question, but how do you think we got here where it's like, it's hard for some Christians to speak against their party? I think of it like, it's almost like, You know, I'm in Washington, D.C. To me, Redskins are trash, but you cannot tell a Redskin fan that. Redskins fans will ride for it. And it's like, no matter what, there's this ideology that you have to ride for your team. And sometimes as Christians, we're like on the Democrat team. So it's like, okay, no matter what the Democrats do, I ride with them. Or we're on the Republican team. No matter what the Republicans do, I'm riding with them. Like, I just don't understand. And I mean, I don't know if you know, but just how in the world did we got here?
Yeah, we need to talk about this, man, because I have like a sports tribalism theorem where I think, because really the problem is tribalism. And I think when we're talking about sports, tribalism is great. That's really what sports are for, right? So we can have all kind of opinions and hate on somebody else's team, even if it's not rational. That's kind of what sports are for. They're for entertainment. That doesn't work as well in politics. And so really what we're seeing is people choosing a tribe and then defending that tribe at all costs. And I think it really comes from us putting our identity into our political party. And that's by design, right? So when I was when I was really heavy in the Democratic Party and I wasn't really separating myself. So I've been there too. I'm not just here criticizing others. When I was in that place, they get you to where you hate the other side so much and you're so focused on the other side that all you want to do is for them to lose. And sometimes that's even more important than you getting good policy passed. And so your identity is in the tribe. And when your party is part of your identity, of course you're going to try to protect yourself. Of course, you're going to try to defend yourself because you begin to treat it like if somebody says something about the party, they saying something about your mama, right?
Yeah.
And that's just not the way that it should be. We need to separate that from our identity because we don't control it. Nobody controls what these parties do. These parties have been all over the spectrum on a number of issues, and that's not necessarily under our control, but our public witness is our responsibility, is under our control, and we need to do a better job of expressing that. But it really is tribalism, and you hit it on the head. We treat it just like we treat sports. I think that's a release. I think there's something in us that wants to be tribal. So let's do it with sports. Let's not do it with our politics and partisanship.
Yeah, it's wild to me. Another thing that you guys do, which is key, you guys break down legislations because it stresses me out. Like we get our information so much from news, which isn't really all the way news. There is a great bias to it. So our information tunnel typically comes from whatever news organization represents or leans more toward our party. And so sometimes we get, like yesterday I was talking to somebody and they was like, now they're trying to tear down statues of Jesus. Well, they're not actually trying to tear down statues of Jesus. They're having arguments about white Jesus, but their news funnel, that's probably what he got. One of the things that you guys do, which I really appreciate, is like when there was legislation about LGBT, you kind of break it down and make those distinctions between, yes, I can disagree with you on some things, but that doesn't mean that I don't feel like you should be discriminated against, or you know what I mean? So I think sometimes as believers, we have an issue operating in nuance.
No, absolutely. And again, that's something that's by design. So you kind of have to call it out, on your end, because really they want you to be in a situation where that's how you're looking at the issues and that's how, you're judging it based on their framework. So there are certainly there's certainly just agendas that we have to be aware of. And one of the things the AND campaign tries to do is say, look, again, everything has to be framed based on a Christian worldview. Right. If I'm telling you some information and it's based on a whole different worldview and a whole different agenda, then the way the information comes to you is going to be skewed. Right. And so one of the things the AND campaign has tried to do is say, look, we don't care if you're a Republican or you're a Democrat. Let us break down this issue. And here's how it should look to a Christian. Here's the decision you do need to make. Now you make the decision, right, but here's how we think it breaks down from a Christian point of view.
Yeah. Now, and we're in like a crazy, crazy time. There is this belief among certain Christians that you don't really need to address social justice, that you just need to preach Jesus. And some things are so crazy to me that it's hard for me to rebuttal because I just don't understand the framework of that. But Would you be able to speak to just those who feel like, there's this idea that there's a social justice trap, that to speak about social justice or deal with social justice, you're falling in some trap of the left, or you're falling in some trap wherever. But there's tons of scriptures where where the Bible talks about justice. But would you be able to speak to just the belief that Christians don't need to deal with social justice?
Yeah, man, it's an unfortunate. It's just unfortunately it's bad theology, and it's really taking a hold in kind of like white evangelical spaces, right? Where you hear people say, "Look, we don't have time for all that race stuff, all that justice stuff, because we're here to proclaim the gospel." That's just a bad reading. That's almost biblical illiteracy. I've called it. This is a bad reading of the gospel. I do want to affirm part of that. I do think the number one thing that Christians are supposed to do based on the great commandment is proclaim the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Yeah.
That takes nothing away from the fact that we're also supposed to do justice and love our neighbor, right? That's the second half of I'm sorry. That's the Great Commission is making sure that we proclaim the gospel. The second part of the Great Commandment is loving your neighbor.
Right.
Now, what does it mean to love your neighbor? I often say that I think everybody cares about social justice. I don't think there's anybody who really doesn't care about it. I think the question is, who do they care about it for? And who are they willing to look out for? Now, I often ask this question. I said, look, is anybody going to allow their child to be mistreated at their school if there's something they could do about it? Right? If there's something you can do about it, you're going to go up to the school and you're going to get it taken care of.
Right.
Is anybody going to allow the kids in their neighborhood to drink lead poisoned water? Absolutely not. All these people who say we're just supposed to proclaim the gospel, if they found out their kids were drinking lead poisoned water, I guarantee you within the hour they would be on somebody's neck to make sure that changed.
Yeah.
But then when it comes to other folks, it's like, well, we're not really supposed to get in all that. Oh, really? You would get into it for yourself?
Yeah.
You would defend yourself. If your child fell down and cut its leg, you would try to fix it. You wouldn't just say, well, I'm supposed to proclaim the gospel. I'm going to let you bleed out. Right? No, God put certain things in our sphere of influence. And if we truly love our neighbor, we will do that. Now, we are supposed to proclaim the gospel. That's the Great Commission. We understand that. But if we truly have faith, the fruit of that faith comes out in our actions. And it says over and over in the Bible, it talks about deeds and not just words in 1 John 3. If you go to Micah, Amos, Isaiah, it talks about justice all throughout and people being punished, Israel and others being punished for not doing justice, not just for not proclaiming God, but not doing justice. That's a way to glorify God, because if God is a God of justice and we're his servants, well, then surely we'll be doing his work. And so sometimes you just have to break it down differently for people, because the enemy sends false gospels and false theology to people. And when it fits our narrative, we bite on it. But that's not just for folks, that's not just for white evangelicals. That's for everybody, because there are some people who say, don't worry about all the other stuff. Just do justice, right? Don't worry about righteousness. Don't worry about morality. Just do justice. And I think that's a distorted justice, because righteousness and justice go together. And if you're doing something that you're calling justice, but it's really just trying to enable people to do something that's not right, then you need to talk about that too. So there is two sides to it, but it's just bad theology, man. And unfortunately, it's coming from people who pride themselves oftentimes on having a pristine and strong theology, and they just really don't.
Have you guys, because you sound more optimistic about people than me, but like, have you guys experienced like pushback? Like, how have you guys been received in your message? Because I think, and I'm probably wrong, I just got out of a funk all last week. I just felt like the word was coming to an end. But like, I feel like people, and this is probably not truth, it's probably my cynicalness, but I just feel like people don't. It has got me in the funk, because I feel like we cannot be serving the same Jesus. Like, if you think that Jesus Christ would not care about whether or not we're putting kids in cages, like he would not care about that, would not care about how we treat the homeless, how we treat the poor. We just can't be serving the same Jesus. But have you guys had any pushback, I guess? How has your message been received in the church as you guys progress?
Oh man, you go to our Twitter page, you'll see we get pushback all the time. I mean,
Crazy.
We get people who say, being Marxist, that we're liberal, and all kind of stuff that if you really pay attention to what we're saying, it's not even defensible.
Yeah.
But yeah, we get that all the time. I mean, when you're kind of shaking things up and trying to get people to focus on the gospel instead of focusing on their culture or the narrative that they want to push, it shakes people up, and they're going to react in ways that are not necessarily kind to you. But it happens, and that's part of discipleship. I think if you look at the disciples, if you look at Jesus, you're just gonna run into that. And so we try to take it in stride. It's not always easy. We try to address it in a charitable way. Maybe we're not always successful, but I think we do a pretty good job of it. But we're one of those folks, we have a battle on two fronts. So we don't just get hit on one front. We get hit on two fronts. A lot of the folks who are really, really conservative don't want to hear about social justice, and they get upset when you talk about it. And then a lot of folks on the left. I mean, a lot of folks are getting pulled into some ideologies that just aren't biblical. And so when you talk about issues like abortion, when you talk about the Christian sexual ethic, they often also want to push back on that. Now, we make sure that we always talk about those issues with compassion.
Right.
We would be remiss not to talk about them just because pop culture doesn't want us to talk about them. That's not who we are. And so we got to move forward whether folks want to hear it or not. So we have tweets that a lot of people like. We have tweets that people don't like. But I think that's just part of that's par for the course.
How do you navigate and I guess I would say, I'm curious, specifically maybe with the Democratic Party, there's this weird balance of let's say LGBTQ. I think that traditionally the church has treated the homosexual, that whole community, like trash. They definitely have, some countries where if you're gay, they will kill you. Parents kicking their children out because they're gay. And as Christians, because we didn't agree with something, we kind of have just left that whole thing and we kind of let it happen. So if something bad happened to you and it was out of response because you were gay, I feel like as Christians, we didn't really do a lot. So I think that what we are, in my opinion, I feel like what we're experiencing is a response to that. But there's this other, in my opinion, like sometimes the left goes way left. And it's like, how do you, I guess I'm just asking you because you're a Democrat, how do you walk that line of trying to find that balance? Because sometimes, and I don't know if I'm saying this right, but it doesn't seem good enough. It seems like they want you to go. People want you to go all the way left.
Yeah. For me, first you got to deal with the history of it. And brother, I think you hit it right on the head. The church has not always responded in a compassionate and loving way to the LGBTQ community. And the first thing that we do is admit that. First thing we do is repent of that. And in our rhetoric and in how we talk about those issues, let people know I'm no better than anybody in this conversation. I mean, right. My history is no better than anybody else. I'm God loves me no more than he loves you. That's not where the conversation is at. And so that's the first thing that we have to say. I think some people kind of frame it as the church was too following the Bible too closely. And that's why, we ended up mistreating people. And I say, no, the problem is we weren't following the Bible closely enough.
Right.
Like the problem was we weren't really thinking about the Sermon on the Mount. We weren't really thinking about the Imago Dei. We weren't really thinking about the second half of the Great Commandment and loving our neighbors and how the sin that's within in us. Yeah. So yeah, that's the first thing I have to say. Yeah. But what that doesn't mean is that I have to affirm something that the Bible says I can't affirm, right? And so there is the dignity of the person, and that's real, right? It's not just like, I love you, but I hate that. No, I love you, and that's not the number one thing that I'm going to think about with you, and I will give my life for you, right? Mm-hmm. That has to be real. I mean, and folks have to feel that sincerely. And I think how we have talked about that issue, we've done that and we'll continue to do so. I'm not going to stand around and let anybody be bullied or anybody's rights be kind of abridged just because of how they identify. That's just not right. Yeah. But we do have to maintain the Christian sexual ethic. And so I think we have to be more biblical than we were when we were mistreating somebody because we disagreed with them. That doesn't mean I have to agree with you. Every day in our personal lives, we disagree with people that we love.
Right. Yeah.
Right. We just got to make sure that compassion is very clear and sincere, and we're not making it bigger than all the other things that go on in the church and everywhere else. We got to talk about it. We have to be real about it. But we got to love people, because at the end of the day, people are, a lot of people are just trying to survive and get away from the tension and pain that they've been feeling their whole lives, whether they're gay or straight.
Yeah. Is it tricky because like some people, they say like this whole thing of if you should say Black Lives Matter, because some people have a issue with other things that the organization also affirms. To me, I think it's Christians' fault. I've kind of been ranting about this all week, but I feel like Black Lives Matter was like the story of the Good Samaritan. Black Lives Matter was that man who was on the street beat up and abandoned, but Christians walked past Black Lives Matter. Yeah. And it took another group of people who may not have a right understanding of God to pick that up and say what it. So now, instead of the church running with Black Lives Matter, you have another organization running with Black Lives Matter. And sometimes, there's this thing where sometimes people, they don't want to say that, or they don't want to feel like they are picking up the organization because of the other things that they affirm. Is it tricky? Because I guess with some people, it feels like there's no balance, if that makes sense. So to affirm this organization also affirms this. Definitely, I guess also when we're voting, if that makes sense.
So two things. Number one, Black Lives Matter, right? I think that's real. And we can't always, too often Christians, especially on the right, we go into the public square, into politics, with so much fear of everybody else, right? I see where they go wrong, so I can't be nowhere near them. I can't even pay attention to the things they do right. Yeah. Instead of saying, where can I be co-belligerents with a group that has stepped into a void that was left by the church? If the church had been on it and the church had been saying what they were supposed to say, especially when it comes to white evangelicals on racial issues, then there would be no need for that, because half of the problems would have already been solved. Right. But that didn't happen. And so people stepped into the void who, as you said, might have some things that we would disagree with, but where can we find common ground? And if you go in and you serve with people and you build relationships, sometimes you can have a better conversation about what you agree on. What you disagree on, and either you agree to disagree, or they might say, you know what, you have a point. But when you stand away and you point and you say, man, look at y'all doing this wrong, you're doing that wrong, but you're not doing justice, you really don't have any standing to have the conversation. And that's where this is coming from. So for me, I think Black Lives Matter, the statement is real. I get where it comes from. Anybody who's working in good faith should understand what that means by now, right? It's been several years since that came out. So if you really want to know and you care, you should understand by now. And people just, you do have to, but let me say this, here's the second thing. When you go into the public square and advocate for issues, you do have to be vigilant. Right. One of the things that happens is we get so excited. We see the need, we see the issue. We just jump all the way in, and we haven't even sized up who our allies are, what their end game is, or any of these things. And that is dangerous. So I do tell people it is very important to do your homework. It's just like if you're entering into a contract for a business or something else, and it's a partnership. If you have a good attorney, you're going to go through a whole lot of due diligence to make sure you know who your partner is, you know what their responsibilities are. It has to be the same thing when you come into the public square. So you do have to be cautious about that. And that's why I think it is important for Christians also to have their own institutions when we go into these conversations, so that we can do that due diligence and that work and not get so caught up that we turn around and our values have changed. Our agenda is not a Christian agenda because we're not paying attention. But I tend to emphasize the good things that Black Lives Matter does. And we do have to have a conversation about what we disagree with, but do justice first. And then I think you have standing to have that conversation.
Crazy. Are you, and I'm sorry, I'm all over the place because there's so many things that I want to ask you. Are you optimistic that things will get better? Like I said, I've been in a very cynical funk. It just doesn't seem to me like I feel like we're talking past each other. And I'm not sure how we can achieve anything talking past each other. But do you think that things are going to get better?
Well, it's certainly not an easy road. I don't think tomorrow we're going to turn around and everything's going to be different. But based on the conversations that I'm having, based on the people that I know are working hard to make a difference, I do have a lot of hope that things will change. Not that things will ever be perfect,
right.
But I have all the faith in the world that our God is powerful enough to deal with all this stuff if His people are faithful and if His people are prayerful. So yeah, I see some differences, and I'll give you an example. I mean, when the COVID crisis first got going, the AND campaign started something called Churches Helping Churches, which is what we wanted to do, was make sure that small, low-income churches, mostly African-American churches, had funding to get through the crisis, because a lot of them, once they stopped having service, they were in trouble, right? So we were like, man, can we get some folks to kind of donate to them? We ended up raising over $1 million.
Crazy.
For low-income churches. And some of that came, not all of it, but some of it came from white evangelicals who we probably didn't agree with on some political matters. But they saw that there was a need for other churches, and they were able to give that money with no strings attached because we were building relationships and having those conversations. That to me says something. You know, it says that there's something there, and there are leaders. I mean, if you look hard enough, there are leaders like Dr. Russell Moore, Ligon Duncan, who just, wrote a very strong statement about why Mississippi should change their flag, and it actually ended up happening. There are leaders within white evangelical spaces who are trying to do the right thing. Now, I feel like sometimes we got to keep pushing them. And then there are those who don't want to do anything. So don't get me wrong, but there is hope. And I do see God moving. So we just got to be, have endurance. I mean, if you look at the civil rights movement, whenever I get down and I feel frustrated or I feel angry, I think about what them brothers and sisters in the civil rights movement were going through.
Yeah.
I mean, if you read something like Parting the Waters, which is about Dr. Martin Luther King and all the dynamics that he was facing, I mean, he was getting sued. He had the FBI and J. Edgar Hoover on him. He had people in the church that were undercutting him. The stuff he was going through was crazy. And somehow he still managed to speak with love, to speak with compassion, and lead in a tenacious way. If he could do that, if Fannie Lou Hamer could do that, and others could do that, I think we can do it today. And so it's okay to be tired. It's okay to, be frustrated for a while, but we have inspiration and we have a God that can pull us through that, and we got to get to work.
Yeah, I agree. I think it frustrates me sometimes when I think Christians don't realize that we're supposed to be God's hands and feet. Like, if He's going to do something, He's going to do something through us. And so I guess my next question to you would be, what do you think that Christians could start doing better in general to kind of keep things moving forward, even along with the AND campaign? I actually talked to a couple of people when I told them this interview, and one of the things that they wanted me to ask you is, how could they help?
That's a great question. I love it. So one of the things that we're trying to do is we're trying to, I think let me say this is the defining moment for the church, right? How we respond to racial injustice in this moment is going to demonstrate to a lot of other people if we really believe what we say we believe, or are we just focused on ourselves and we really are not relevant to the conversation?
Right.
Is the church relevant or not? Right. And we have to answer that question, I think, with clarity. So it has to be very clear where the gospel stands on racial injustice, and that God has an expectation and a standard by which we must follow, that we will do justice, right? That needs to be very clear. And then we need to act as a body. We need to act together, because if you look, even if the numbers, as a strategist, I'm always looking at numbers. If you look at the numbers of Christians on the right and Christians on the left, you very quickly see that we have the power to make a huge difference in this political landscape. If Christians on the right today said, you know what, racial injustice is important, we're going to move on it, something would change very quickly. And if we came together, that'd be great. So what I think we have to do is, number one, bear witness. We got to be very clear on where we stand on the issue. Number two, we have to unite and organize and really get involved in these criminal justice elections. So that's the election of your judges, it's the election of your prosecutor, the election of your sheriff. A lot of people are so into social justice, and that, we can protest and do all those things, which are important. But if you don't know who your district attorney is, if you don't know who your sheriff is, you have to question. If you don't know them, then you're not holding them accountable. and you need to get more involved too, right? So there's more than one way to kind of be uninformed, and we got to make sure that we're a part of those conversations, but also building relationships with others so that we can move forward together. So one of the things the AND campaign is doing, we're putting together a prayer and action justice initiative, which is going to give Christians on-ramps to actually engaging in this conversation, changing policy, because that's really where it's at. And so when people ask, what should I do? What should I do? There's a lot of things you can do, but the best thing that you can do is do it through an institution. Right? Because if you and I are doing it separately and I'm talking one thing and you're talking another, and we're not going to be as powerful as if we come together, then we organize people to come together with us. We'll have a way more powerful voice because there is power in numbers. And so the first thing that we're trying to do is get to a critical mass of Christians, a diverse group of Christians, and then talk about changing policy. The thing that people have to understand is we hear so much about what's going on federally, but most criminal justice issues are going to be taken care of on a local level, which is more direct, which you can have more of an impact on. So I think the few things you can do is organize, get some people who agree with you to come together and do it through an institution, because institutions cultivate the endurance and the commitment that is needed to actually change things. It's very hard to do as an individual, and we have a very individualistic culture. So you got to come together, do these things through an institution with others, a diverse group, and you can really make some change. So getting involved in those elections, going to your city hall, going to city hall, seeing what's on the agenda, letting them know you're watching and paying attention, because we have to hold our elected officials accountable. This is a representative democracy. And so those representatives are going to be the ones voting on a lot of things that we're not voting on. But if you don't know who they are, that's hard. Now, somebody would say, well, man, I ain't got time to go to all those meetings, by myself. I got a job. I got other things to do. That's why you do it through an institution, because if you can't be there, somebody else in the group can be there, and you can plan who can go at what time. That's how that works. And so we got to get away from the individualism and really focus on doing all that stuff together.
That's such a good point. It seems like the church, I think the church has been more of a fan of politics than actually involved in politics. So instead of doing exactly what you're saying, like actually getting out there, strategizing and voting on real issues that could change things, it feels like we've been just following the direction of whoever our party is. You know what I mean? Instead of really looking at the interests of what we feel all right. Like I know some preachers, and I'm curious your thoughts, because so many people are so dedicated to their party, both right and left. There's some preachers that don't like to talk about politics because they feel like it just divides. Do you think that's wrong, or do you think they should talk about it or address it?
I think they should talk about it.
Okay.
And I think they should take the time to learn how to talk about it. Because, we expect our pastors to know everything, to know exactly how to talk about every issue. And sometimes they don't know. So either they can talk about it or they can bring in others to talk about it. And I think that's one of the things about the AND Campaign's book that's coming out, which is called Compassion and Conviction. It's really our framework for how Christians should engage politics. Will help pastors and other folks learn how to address it. It's Bible, it's Bible-based. Very good for like Bible studies and stuff like that, but it gives you the tools to be able to address it. So pastors should, but I'm slow to tell a pastor exactly what to say or to think a pastor knows how to address every issue perfectly. They don't. But I do think they should address it. And something else that I think you were getting at is we've outsourced our public witness, right? Whereas our public witness should be about us being disciples and servants of Jesus Christ. Our public witness is about whatever our party is saying at the time. Right. And that's just unfortunate. We have to control our public witness. If there's a conversation and there's a bunch of Christian Democrats in it, there's a bunch of Democrats having a conversation, everybody should be able to point out the Christian Democrat. Too often you hear a conversation, a bunch of Democrats, you don't know who's Christian and who's not. If there's a conversation with a bunch of Republicans, you should be able to point out who's the Christian Republican. But that's not what happens, because we join these organizations and we become them. We allow that to become our identity, and that can't be the case.
Dang, this is good, because I think that has definitely been the case. I think I've been crazy lazy. Could you talk to us more about the book? When's the book coming out, and can you give us some more about what the book is about?
Absolutely, man. So the book is called Compassion and Conviction: The AND Campaign's Framework for Faithful Civic Engagement. And this is really, it has something for everybody. So the person who doesn't even know where to start, to get involved, to be faithful when it comes to politics. This is going to take you from why Christians should get involved to what's the real relationship between church and state, and give you kind of that civic lesson, and then go all the way through partisanship, partnership, race in politics. I mean, so many different subjects. And then for the folks that have been involved but feel uncomfortable, like they haven't been faithful, this has something for you too. I mean, I'm somebody who's been in politics for a long time. I wrote it with a brother named Michael Ware, who worked in the Obama administration, did faith outreach, so saw a lot of stuff that went on in federal politics. Also, Chris Butler was a part of it, was another co-author who's in Chicago, who's a pastor and has been a politico in Chicago for years. And so there's a lot of knowledge that just helps Christians get back focused on the gospel and seeing how that applies to the politics, rather than just leaving church and becoming whatever the people around you are, right? So it has something for everybody. If you want to start a Bible study so your church can think about it better, if you just want to read it yourself because you don't know where to start, all of that is going to be there. And I think Christians are really going to appreciate what's in that book.
Man, you guys are just crazy, crazy, crazy necessary. And that's one of the reasons why I want to chat with you, because I just feel like this is information that Christians need. What made you want to get into politics?
Good question, man. I had, my dad was always interested in politics, had me kind of around it a little bit. I always like to read political biographies. And so when I first moved to Atlanta, once I graduated from law school, moved to Atlanta, I had a group of friends who we would always come together and just talk politics, right? What was going on and who we thought would be the next president and all that stuff. And one day I said, man, let's stop being so academic about it and really get into it. Why wouldn't we just try our hand and see how we can help out? And so we had a mayoral race coming up, and we did a whole bunch of research on all the candidates, chose a candidate, and really just knocked on the campaign office and said, hey, we'd like to help. From there, worked on the campaign, knocking on doors, all the way to doing, debate preparation, running campaigns ourselves. And it just kind of started from there. The best way to get into, to really, really get into politics, but you want to have your base and know who you are first, is to work on a campaign of somebody that you believe in. Because political campaigns really give you a view of how politics work. The interesting thing about politics is everybody feels like an expert, but until you really get into the game, it's hard to really know what goes on behind the scenes.
Crazy. And then going back to random questions, because to me, you're like, there's so much questions I want to ask you about. There's a big thing now about defunding the police. Is that the right language? Is that the right step? I know in Minnesota, they dismantled the police. And again, so much information comes to Christians through political bias that it's hard to decipher the truth in that situation. So could you kind of bring some clarity to us as far as defunding the police, what that means, what that looks like?
Yeah, it's not always clear, but let me present, I think, what is the best side of the argument that I've heard from defund the police. So some people would say that it means that you need that not to completely defund the police, not that we don't need police officers, but to look at the budget and put money other places, right? Some of the things that police officers do would be better done by a social worker, right? So there's situations that are nonviolent, that there's no real threat, that can escalate when the police officers come, that probably wouldn't escalate if a social worker came. Some people would also say, well, if you put more money into recreation centers, which is one thing we did here in Atlanta, if you put some of the police money there, you won't have to worry about kids committing so many crimes. So I think the strongest argument for it is look at the budget and see if there are other places you can allocate some of that money to prevent police coming in and actually escalating a situation that didn't have to be escalated. I think that's the strongest argument. I don't necessarily disagree with that. Budgets are very complex, but certainly you should always be looking at them. And there may be room, and I suspect there is room to allocate, money other places, but you have to really look at it. I mean, and that again is something that's done on a local level. You can't legislate that from a federal level because localities are all gonna be different. They have different budgets, different issues, all that stuff. The worst argument I've heard So some people are saying it doesn't literally mean defund the police or abolish the police. And then some people are saying it does mean abolish the police, that we don't need the police, that the community could police themselves. That argument I don't agree with as much. I live in the hood. And if I go to my neighbors, my elderly neighbors, my neighbors with kids, things like that, none of them are going to tell you that they don't need police officers. Now, they might not be in love with police officers, right? We've all had those experiences, and that's what we're trying to address. But many of them know that there are people in our neighborhoods that are deterred by knowing that police are around. If they knew the police weren't around, they would wreak havoc in the neighborhood. That's just the reality of it. Now, that may hurt my argument when I'm trying to force the police to change and do something different. Right. But to be intellectually honest, as somebody who's lived in the hood for a while, that's just the truth. And so I think we really need to be intellectually honest when we approach this and not just follow a narrative. The police need to change. Right. The culture, they need to look at the budget. They need to look at a lot of things that they do, the assumptions that are made, how they treat certain people. That has to happen. So do not get me wrong. Right. But that doesn't mean that there's not a necessity there or need there, especially in low-income areas. And the way that this conversation is talked about a lot of times is a lose-lose for the hood. Because either we have police that aren't reformed, that are still mistreating folks, or you say get rid of them. And so you have a situation like you've had in Baltimore and other places where they're just not doing police work. And the murder rates do go up. That's just the facts, whether you want to admit it or not. So we've got to be intellectually honest. And as you said earlier, nuanced in a conversation to say, no, we need the police, but they got to change, and they got to change now. And so we do need to look at budgets and all the things that we talked about. So I probably wouldn't, if I was the person that came up with the name for the policy, I probably wouldn't have called it defund the police. I think that's the opposite of nuance. But if people say it means something different, I'm willing to listen. And I think part of that argument makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I'm curious to see how, I think it's called Chaz, the place in Seattle, will turn out. I definitely.
Somebody's already died there. Yeah. That's just not where you want to go. I mean, that's an experiment that might work a little bit, but that's not what you want. You don't want to put kids and other people in that, in that situation. That, that's it's not real. It's not real life, man.
I definitely would not be visiting Chaz.
Bro.
All right, and I guess my last question is: how can people donate to the AND campaign? Find out more about you guys.
Awesome. Yeah. So one way to help is, just donating online. So you can do monthly donations, or you can just give a one-time donation. If you go to andcampaign.org, you'll see a donate button, and it's fairly easy to give, and we appreciate that. But we would want you, some of your time. If you have time and you really want to get engaged, another way to do it is we're starting chapters all over the United States. So if you're in a city where you think either there is a chapter or you could start a chapter, that's a conversation we could have. It's a vetting process, so it's not something that happens immediately. But we're trying to grow. We're trying to let the church know what we're doing and bring the church into a better way of doing things. We're always willing to partner. It's not about us controlling everything or making sure we're the only organization doing things. But we do think we have a witness that people need to hear in order to be more faithful in their civic engagement. And so, we would love to have work. There is no AND campaign without the people in the pews and with pastors and stuff like that. It just doesn't exist.
So if they wanted to find out if their city has a chapter or they wanted to start a chapter, how would they do that? They would go to the website?
You could go to the website. The website has the chapters listed, or you could just email us at engage@andcampaign.org, and we'll let you know if there's a chapter, and we'll connect you to that chapter.
Brother, thank you so much. You have helped me, because I'm trifling. I'm just the armchair complainer. I just throw stones at people and say everybody's trash. But no, you have helped me. You've motivated me. I think as Christians, we have a lot of blind spots, and I think how we engage in politics is a huge blind spot for the church. And the AND campaign, I think, is a necessary different movement, because it's I don't know of anything else like it, and I'm just so grateful for it, man.
Well, thank you for giving us a platform to talk about it, Eric. Man, hopefully we can have this conversation again. If you ever do talk about sports or anything, I love to talk about my sports tribalism theorem because I think that's pretty interesting too. Now, but we enjoy it, man. Any opportunity we have to speak to the Saints and others, we're happy to do it. So thank you for having us on.
Definitely, brother. Anytime we get too confused and don't know what's going on, I would call you and say, help us
Please do.
Make sense of this mess. All right, Disruptive Faith Podcast. Justin, man, you have changed my life. I hope you guys are encouraged. I hope you're informed. Be sure to check out the AND campaign. This has been great. You guys be blessed, and we are out. Hope you guys enjoyed that conversation. Let us know your thoughts below in the comment section. If you haven't subscribed already, hit that bell. Make sure you do so. If you want more conversation like these, go ahead and hit the video. Hope you guys are blessed. See you next time. Also, if you want, you can catch us on Spotify, Apple Music, and wherever you catch fine and great podcasts like these. All right, you take care. Be blessed.